We are going to start right on the dot. So I am Teresa Flores, the program director of the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. I'm actually located in Columbus, Ohio. Our headquarters is in Brighton, Michigan. And I would like to welcome Jean Jacobson here. She is our chairperson of the Education Resource Working Group, one of our working groups under the U.S. Catholic Sisters. And then she's going to start us off with a prayer. So go ahead, Jean.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. This is a prayer written by Sister Roberta Moser, who is a Felician Sister of North America. The title of the prayer is Compassion is What Makes Us Human. One of the best things about being human is the way we experience compassion. It's when we challenge ourselves to walk in the shoes of someone who is suffering and needy. It is then that we open ourselves to understanding. God of compassion, take us to those who are in need today. May we be instruments of your compassion and generously extend to others our time and loving care. Teach us to be open and understanding. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So right now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Gail Dines. I'm going to pull up her bio here. Dr. Gail Dines is a professor emerita at Wheelock College in Boston. And she's the president of Culture Reframed. She has been researching and writing about the porn industry for well over 30 years. She's a recipient of the Myers Center Award for the Study of Human Rights in North America, and author of numerous books and articles. Her latest book, Pornland: How Porn has Hijacked Our Sexuality, has been translated into 5 languages. Dr. Dines is the founding president and CEO of the nonprofit Culture Reframed, dedicated to building resilience and resistance in children and youth to the harms of the hypersexualized and pornified society. Culture Reframed develops cutting-edge educational programs that promote healthy development, relationships, and sexuality. Dr. Dines has worked with organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Centers for Disease Control, the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals, as well as government bodies in the US, Brazil, UK, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, and Canada. She appears regularly on CNN, NPR, BBC, CBS, and writes for media outlets such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, Newsweek, and the Boston Globe. Please just everyone welcome Dr. Dines. Thank you so much for helping us learn more about this really important topic.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to get it full screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Is that good? Good.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful for being invited, because often many anti-trafficking groups don't tend to bring in the analysis of pornography. And what I'm going to argue is that you really can't separate the two. You're looking in many ways at similar industries. And what I'm going to explain today is the way in which they're integrated economically, culturally, socially, and especially for the survivors actually in the sex industry. Now, I'm going to provide a trigger warning because some of this is very difficult, and so please take care of yourself. So what I'm going to do today is really use the words trafficking and prostitution interchangeably, because as Melissa Farley has argued, more than 80% of the time, women in the sex industry are under pimp control. And that is what trafficking is. And this is also true for porn performers. So I'm going to be talking about trafficking, pornography, and prostitution in very similar ways. So let's talk about what goes on in our culture. And I want to talk about some of the media images, especially including porn, that kind of glamorize prostitution. Now, this is critical because a lot of young people growing up learn about what prostitution is, not from the reality of the industry, but actually from the media. So if we're going to talk about that, we have to start with, of course, Pretty Woman, which is still very popular today, still highly watched on different platforms. And it tells the story of a prostituted woman, Julia Roberts, who falls in love with her John, Richard Gere, and then at the end they go off and they live happily ever after. So the question was, this film made a fortune, okay, incredible. And one of the things we know that Hollywood does is if they hit on a winner, they make part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6. What was interesting here is there was no Pretty Woman part 2. So the question is, why not? And then what becomes clear is if you had Pretty Woman part 2, it would be completely ridiculous. The reason for that is that let's go forward and think about what Pretty Woman part 2 would look like. So they're on the honeymoon, and the prostituted woman and now her John husband are having a wonderful time because he's very wealthy. And then they decide, one night they're having a discussion what they're going to have for dinner. And she wants one thing and he wants another, and they can't agree. What do you think he's going to call her? How do you think he's going to speak to her? You dirty whore, don't you fight with me. I picked you up off the streets. I'm sending you right back there if you don't agree with me. Can you imagine what her life would look like had she indeed married a John? Now, interestingly, somebody has a kind of ironic sense of humor in Hollywood, because actually her second film after this, Julia Roberts' second film, was called Sleeping with the Enemy, which is exactly what this would have been. Because having been with the John, she would have, what would she be doing? Sleeping with the enemy. And this is specifically a film about a batterer who is basically spends his time trying to stalk her down and kill her. So this is very possible what her life would have been. So really, you could have called this Pretty Woman Part 2. And I wanted to think about some of the very famous actors who have played prostituted women and kind of glamorized the whole role. And what we find is that there's been 26 Oscar nominations for playing prostituted women, and 15 have won, which is actually pretty incredible, that if you want to win an Oscar, it would seem your best bet is to play a prostituted woman. Now, what the media also does, and this is equally important, it is ignores, glosses over, or rehabilitates famous Johns. So I'm going to ask you a little question here. So guess who, very famous actor, who was arrested for beating up prostituted women, one so badly that she ended up in hospital and he had to pay her medical bills. Now, normally when I'm speaking live, people shout out ideas, but I'm going to tell you who. Jack Nicholson. And I'd be surprised if many of you had heard of this, because there was a complete media shutdown on this. And just to show you I'm not making this up, this is actually the court order, the court reportings from the case. Now, what I want to say here is very interesting. I found this out because I was on a vacation back to England, and it was all over the front news, all over the front pages. And yet when I got back and I said to people here, excuse me, have you heard about this? Nobody'd heard about it. And that year, Jack Nicholson was sitting front row at the Oscars. Everyone saying how wonderful he was. It was if it had never happened. Some other famous Johns. Elliot Spitzer, who was the former governor of New York, never spent a day in prison. Charlie Sheen, who spent 1.6 million on prostituted women in a year, and then went on, by the way, to sign the biggest media contract on television ever signed at 2.5 men. Tiger Woods, who has been almost completely rehabilitated. Hugh Grant, Now, the question becomes, what creates a John? So we have to begin to think about the culture we live in, and how did we end up with trafficking? And indeed, you can argue that men who go to prostitution, to pornography, are also sex buyers. What creates this? And there's two answers. One is that men are biologically predisposed to being sex buyers, and we call this biological determinism. And the second is that men are socialized into being sex buyers. Now, I am a sociologist, and I refuse to accept that men are biologically predisposed to be sex buyers. I know that's not true. I know it's not true as a sociologist. I know it's not true as a feminist. And you know what? More profoundly, I know it's not true as the mother of a son. Nobody can tell me that my beautiful son was born predisposed to sex buying or porn using or battering. What we have is a culture that is socializing men into being sex buyers. And the major form of sex ed today for boys and men is pornography. So this is how we get to pornography, is understanding its role in creating Johns, sex buyers, porn users. So just one statistic or one study. High school boys who are frequent users of porn are more likely to buy sex than those who are not. So, and I'll be showing more studies later, but this is just something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about pornography, the industry, the content, and the effects. So when we go out and talk across really the world on pornography, what we find is that very few groups, whether they be professionals, parents, activists, really understand the role that pornography is playing in changing the culture. Who does understand is Details magazine. Now, Details is a kind of cosmopolitan for men, and they had this article called How Internet Porn is Changing Teen Sex. And in it, they quoted this: there is an entire generation of young people who think sex ends with a money shot to the face. What's a money shot? For those who don't know, it's ejaculation on the face, often by more than one man, 1, 2, 3, 4, any number. And that's always the end of the scene. They call it the money shot because that's where the money is made, the ejaculation on the face. But they understand in Details from listening and talking to young men that this is where young men are at. Now, what is the content? So the gold standard study here is Anna Bridges and her study on the content. And what she found, which she published in the journal Violence Against Women, is that 90% contained at least one aggressive act of both physical and verbal aggression when combined. So this is what we know about the most popular scenes. That this is now, I want to be very clear, this is mainstream. This is not some far out, violent niche market of the porn industry. This is the center of the online porn industry. So if you go on to what most users use the porn, most users go on to what are called the tube sites. This is very much, imagine YouTube, but these are porn tube sites where you've just got millions and millions and millions of images. And as I'll talk about later, the most well-known one is Pornhub. Now, no matter what scene or what you click on, you are going to see the same sex acts. It is very formulaic and generic in pornography. So the number one sex act you're going to see is gagging. This is a man with a penis so far down her throat that she starts to gag and she can't breathe. And as she's gagging, and sometimes tears streaming down her face, and also sometimes I've seen them vomit, he grabs her head and takes it further to his penis, thus making her suffer even more. Again, mainstream. The next one is strangulation. This is hands around the throat. Now, this is especially dangerous because when you cut off any oxygen to the airwaves, you can cause instant heart attack or a stroke. You can also cause long-term damage, such as brain damage. And also, and I've watched women pass out through being strangled on pornography, is what you can also happen is you pass out, you wake up, you think you're okay, and then it can take a couple of days or a week for the passages to swell up and you can die. We also know that this is one of the major acts that Johns asked prostituted women to do. So, and in mainstream life, right, that's in the sex industry, how this has filtered down into mainstream life is there was recently a study, and they asked incoming first-year female students, when was the last time you were strangled during sex? And they talked about their last time, not over their lifetime, but the last time. And what they said, well, the result was 1 in 3. So I want you to think about this. 1 in 3 incoming women into college had been strangled during their last sexual activity. This is the way that pornography drips into mainstream sexual behavior. The other acts, rough anal sex, this is where the sex is so rough that often women's anuses drop out of their body. They get anal prolapses. As I said, ejaculation on the face, hair pulling, spanking, spitting in the face. So it is very common to see a scene where you have a young woman with a penis down her throat, one in her anus, one in her vagina, pounding, body punishing sex, having her hair pulled, being spat upon, and then ejaculated all over. This is your average scene. And as I'm going to say in a minute, the average age of boys getting onto pornography, depending on which study you look at, but the average age of boys being catapulted into this world is 9 to 11. And we have much anecdotal evidence from child protection agencies that it's down to 7 and 8. So I want to talk about what this means. And when I was writing my book, Pornland, I literally couldn't stand it. I mean, it was just unbearable. And I was thinking, of course, as one does, as one's own children, my son. And I was thinking, what kind of a man would he be today if this would have been his introduction to sex? Who would he be? Luckily, he's older, so he missed most of this, but it was just starting in his late teens, early 20s. But I was thinking, well, how could he have studied? And then I thought of all those other boys. How did they stand it? Because I couldn't stand it, and I've been doing this for 30 years. So what I did was I went in to the images and I looked at the text that was written. And here's an example from a site that's called Gag Me and Then Fuck Me. Do you know what we say to things like romance and foreplay? We say fuck off. We take gorgeous young bitches and do what every man would really like to do. We make them gag till their makeup starts running, and then we give them the sticky back. Look at this. We take gorgeous young bitches and do what every man would really like to do. Not true. Do not tell me that every man really wants to do this. But the reality is this boy who has got no history of any sexual repertoire, he doesn't know this. There's so little sex education taught in schools, and it certainly doesn't help them build resilience to pornography, that they take this as real, as given. And then they're saying about what man really want to do. So he has to think, if I'm going to be a man, I have to want to do this. Now, a more blatant example is from the promotional copy for anally ripped whores. We at Pure Filth know exactly what you want. Chicks being as fucked till their sphincters are pink, puffy, and totally blown out. Adult diapers just might be in store for these whores when their work is done. So we at Pure Filth know exactly what you want. No, you don't. When boys put boobies or butts into Google, they're not expecting this. They think if they're lucky, they might get a pair of breasts. If they're lucky, really lucky, they get a naked woman. They're not expecting this level of brutality and sexual torture at all. So I want us to think now of what this means for that 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old boy. He's sitting there masturbating to images of sexual cruelty, and he's being told, this is what you want. How does he feel? He must feel such self-loathing, self-disgust, fear, and I can't be, and then arousal to top it all off. Because he's masturbating, because he's aroused, he's thinking he's aroused because this is what he wants. So what I would argue is that we are actually traumatizing a generation of boys. This is a traumatic experience, and I would call and argue that boys being exposed to pornography from an early age is a form of sexual trauma. And this is true for girls as well, which I'll talk about a bit later. But when these boys are being traumatized, what happens is they then go out and play porn sex on who? Girls and women. So now what happens is girls and women become the collateral damage of this. So we are traumatizing an entire generation of youth. And let me tell you, again, this is the major form of sex education by far. Study after study shows that. So how did we get here? How did we possibly get to a position that you can go on to a free porn site, not even put your age in? There's no even, you don't have to tick if you're 18 or not. How did we get here? So the domestication of the internet in 2020, in 2000, domestication of the internet in 2000 made pornography more affordable, accessible, and anonymous. The three major drivers of demand. You no longer had to go to a porn shop. You didn't have to go to some seedy theater. You just got it on your computer at home, and it was free or cheap. We know from statistics, whatever methodology you use, whatever you do, 1 in 3 of pornography, of activity on the internet is pornography, whether it's downloads, whether it's searches, whether it's traffic. We know that porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Now, where did this start? Where did it get really bad? It got really bad in 2007, when a company that very few people have ever heard of, called MindGeek, started to build tube sites. Because before the tube sites where everything was free, kids were having to go on the snippets that were free. Now, this, again, like YouTube, you can have entire porn films that are free. MindGeek is based in Canada. It's from 2007 was developed by Fabian Thyman, and basically over the years it has built the infrastructure of a multi-billion-dollar porn industry, especially the tube sites. It owns 10 of the 15 most popular lucrative porn sites in the world. Just so you know, its major sort of branded cool site is Pornhub, where you can buy coffee mugs with Pornhub on, you can buy a t-shirt. It's become a lot like the Playboy of our generation, in that it becomes the branded cool porn place to go. Here are some statistics. In 2021, now they didn't give out the statistics for 2022, which is interesting, but you can just see we're looking at 47 billion visits, 130 million daily visits, nearly 5 million new videos added each year. And Pornhub boasts that 100 million daily visits is if the combined populations of Canada, Poland, the Netherlands, and Australia visit Pornhub every day. So what do we know about the impact of pornography on boys and men? So we have over 40 years of empirical research, peer-reviewed. Anyone who argues there is no effect either is unfamiliar with the research or simply is willfully refusing to deal with the research. So what do we know? The effects of pornography on boys. Over the last 40 years, study has found that it limited their capacity for intimacy. They're more likely to use coercive tactics, especially bullying with sexting, increased engagement in risky sexual behavior, increased likelihood of perpetuating sexual harassment and rape, increased anxiety and depression, habitual addictive use, and increasingly we're seeing erectile dysfunction because boys are preferring pornography over acts with real women. Now, also, this links to trafficking in that the boys want more hardcore porn, and a lot of the girls at this moment will not do it. So where do you go to get the more hardcore porn? You go to that group of women who can't say no, trafficked, prostituted women who will be beaten, if not murdered, by their Johns if they refuse to do the pornographic violent acts that the men often bring on the phone. So some more studies. Boys exposed to porn are 3.3 times more likely to engage in problematic sexual behaviors. Boys who intentionally sought out porn are 6 times more likely to self-report aggressive behavior. And that's causal. That means A causes B because this was a longitudinal study. 6 times more likely to self-report aggressive behavior. A meta-analysis of longitudinal studies shows that boys exposed to porn more likely to harass, and nearly 70% of boys who frequently daily use porn reported that porn made them want to try out what they'd seen. So now let's see more closely, what are the links between the two? How do we unpack them? And to do that, I'm going to use a concept called a value chain. So imagine what a value chain is. It refers to the whole range of activities involved in making and selling a product or service from actually sourcing the components to production, distribution, and consumption. So imagine growing oranges from the moment you start planting through to when you start picking, through to when you start putting into crates, to when you send to different parts of the country, to when you get to supermarkets, to when you get to consumers, to when they eat them. So that's called a value chain. Every piece along getting it from its sourcing, its beginning, to its actual consumption is a value chain. Now, the value chain, the idea of a value chain is that value is added at each stage. But if we're talking about pornography and prostitution from sourcing the women, which is of course recruitment, right through to distribution and using, which is of course a pornography, buying pornography or actually buying sex, it's more appropriate to think of a harm chain, because instead of adding value to everything that you're doing, you're actually adding harm to the women and the children. So let's look at what the links are in the harm chain rather than the value chain. So recruitment, production, distribution, consumption, and macro social and cultural harms. So this is what the links are between pornography and prostitution. So the first thing is recruitment, grooming and enticing women and children into the sex industry. Now, the recruitment tools, how do they recruit young women? So the macro, the large scale, is a hypersexualized culture, and the more micro personal levels are sexual abuse and poverty. So hypersexualized culture is being used as a groomer. And to explain that, Joanna Angel is a pornographer, and she was interviewed in that same article in details. And she said the girls these days, they just seem to come to the set porn ready. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that all girls are going to end up on a porn set. What it means is that we are grooming our girls to think of themselves as disposable sex objects. Now, how are we doing that? We're doing that through basically absolutely saturating them with images of hypersexualized women. Because when you are going into early and middle adolescence and late, you're looking around to see, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? Now, I want us to think about the culture we live in, because what we now live in is what's called an image-based culture. Now, for those of us over the age of around 35 or 40, we can say that we were brought up in predominantly a print-based culture, not an image-based culture. So a print-based culture was where the dominant form of communication was the printed word. And I want us to think about what that means, because Neil Postman, who was a very famous media specialist, said that when we lived in a print-based culture, we developed some immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the printed word, to which I would add, we have not developed any such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. These come at us and come at us and come at us. So I want us to think about the effects on young girls who are trying to think, what does this look like? To be white, to be thin, large-breasted, and hypersexualized. And image after image shows this. This was at the Met Gala. Look at how the women are dressed. And also look how thin they are. I mean, they look skeletal and certainly way below their body weight. And then when we come to images of women of color, what we tend to see are tropes that came out of slavery, that African-American women are somehow animalistic. That was a trope, a stereotype, whose job it was during slavery was to legitimize the wholesale rape of African-American women. The idea was that you can't blame the poor white slave owners, they can't help themselves. The women just absolutely exude animalistic sexuality. And you see that today in the media. You see often women with painted, black women with bodysuits painted in animal skins or actually dressed in animal skins. Now, what do we know happens to girls who internalize this hypersexualized culture? What we know from the American Psychological Association report is that they are more likely to develop anxiety, depression, body loathing, risk of sexual behavior, early pregnancy, dropping out of high school, sexual victimization. They begin to see themselves as unworthy and more likely worthy of being sexually harassed and sexually abused. This is one way that girls are being groomed into the sex industry. And again, what Aunt Joanna Angel said, this is thanks very much to the porn industry. Now, the second major groomer of girls into the sex industry is a history of sexual abuse. Donovan found that childhood sexual abuse to be the most common precursor of prostitution, 60 to 90%, depending on which study. My sense would be we're up towards the higher end. Another study found that women were 3 times more likely to have been sexually abused as children who were in the porn industry. Now, the production of being prostituted, what we know is the violence inherent in this. Studies have found that 60 to 75% of prostituted women are physically abused by their pimp, trafficker, and or John. And again, my sense is this is low, as is the statistic that 65 to 85% report being raped by a pimp. This is how they groom women, or rather force them in. The pimp acts as a rapist and hands them over then to the other rapist Johns. And the argument is they consented. We always hear this, that they consented. However, women and all people actually consent under conditions of opportunity and constraint. And these conditions were not of their own making. So when you say yes to something, you have to see what real choices you have and if you can say no. So, for example, in pornography, when they sign, yes, I will do this, They don't sign an informed consent contract. They sign a contract. But when you go in for a medical procedure, they make you sign an informed consent contract that tells you everything that can happen to you. They don't get this in the porn industry. But this is what it would look like. Do you agree to losing control of the most intimate images of your body? Do you agree to limited to no recourse to have your images removed? Your body exposed to millions of users who will view you as a slut or a whore or worse, being attacked on social media by the porn industry and porn users if you try to sue the industry or even speak out against it, living in fear that your loved ones, including your children, will see these images and future employers, being stalked and the victims of physical and sexual abuse offline. This is the life of women in the sex industry. Do you agree to living your life in a vulnerable and unsafe world that has robbed you of bodily integrity, the right to privacy, the right to control your own image, the right to live free from fear, the right to live a healthy life, the right to make mistakes and then undo mistakes, the right to self-determination, the rights to evolve into an adult that has ownership of their life, image, sexuality, and personhood? This is what the sex industry takes away from women and children. And yet, again, as I said before, we see it glorified. Now, where porn actually meets prostitution and becomes the same industry, and it's often the same industry, by the way, in pornography, because prostituted women are being filmed, is sex camming. And sex camming is live stream shows for money. Women are asked by subscribers in real time to perform porn sex. Now, the major one, the most popular one, is OnlyFans. And this again has become branded like Pornhub. And what we know, it was started in 2016 in the UK by Tim Stokely. 2018, it was sold to Leon Radvinsky, who is a US-based pornographer who ran a website claiming to offer pedophiles more than 10,000 pre-teen passwords. This is who he is. This is who runs OnlyFans, a man who set up a site for pedophiles previously. OnlyFans. Now, I'm going to run through this because I'm running out of time. It now has 170 million users. That's up from 12 million in 2020. The reason for that increase is COVID. Men got bored. It has over 1.5 million content creators. These are the women who are doing the live sex camming, very much like pornography. And that's up from 120,000 in 2019. And again, COVID forced women into this because they had nowhere to go. They were basically couldn't make any money. There was no childcare. So this is why we see this. The platform, so the women go on there, they do live sex shows. The platform, OnlyFans, takes a 20% cut. And that means, right, that the platform is a pimp platform because it's taking 20%. It's pimping out women. Secondly, this is a bizarre sort of pimp pyramid scheme. It also has a referral scheme. And it says to women who are working on, or rather being exploited on OnlyFans, it says to them, if you bring in your friends, we will give you 20%, a percentage of what they make. Now think of this, they're pimping out women, and then they're saying to those women they're pimping out, you go and get other women so that you can be a pimp also. Now, this is an incredible, incredible thing that has taken, there's not a lecture I give to young people where it's not OnlyFans is not brought up as a way to show your own sexual empowerment and take charge of your sexuality. Why is OnlyFans and sex camming in general so popular? All you have to do is create a password. You know, age verification or minimal. And in 2021, the BBC got hold of leaked documents that showed very lax moderation. And that although they said you had to put forward a documentation that you're 18, they found that the women and girls on there were using their friends' IDs, as were the users. Now, why do men become users? They want what's called a girlfriend experience. And this is taken directly from women who are on OnlyFans. When asked, why do you think men come to your live sex shows? A lot of men enjoy the personal experience. They can find a custom girl who fits their sexual desires, fetishes, and kinks. A lot of the men perceive their wives and girlfriends to be miserable bitches, so they prefer a cheerful webcam girl. They see me as the girlfriend they want, but could never have. These guys don't want prepackaged porn. They want specifics and enjoy the interactions that they get by not merely jerking off to a video. They are socially awkward, so they come to us because we pretend they're really hot. Now, why do women and girls become content providers? The same reason that they become in all forms of the sex industry: money, the poverty. Women and girls were economically desperate during COVID, and it's no accident the two countries with who are the biggest suppliers of cam girls, OnlyFans, etc., are Colombia and Romania, which are poor countries. Now, what's interesting is that when you see OnlyFans in the media, they talk about how much money everyone's making. Look at how much they're all making. Well, you know what the reality is? The average girl or woman on OnlyFans makes about $184 a month. A month. So that's the reality, not this idea that you're going to end up a star. So now what we're talking about, a harm chain and not a value chain, is that the reason is the harms to women and children in pornography and prostitution are not unfortunate byproducts, but are central to the value, that's the sexual pleasure, to the user. The more harm she suffers, the more valuable the product for the pimps, including the porn company owners and consumers. So actually, what's interesting is the fact it's a harm chain is adding economic value to the sex industry, because the users want to see her in pain, they want to see sexual cruelty. So activists who use a harm chain concept explore how the harms of an industry can be reduced or minimized. So for example, if you're looking at the harm chain of a coffee grower, your argument is, where would you put your activism to help coffee growers? And what they did, the activists, is they put it on Starbucks. They didn't go to the coffee growers. They went to the big corporations, and they basically went after Starbucks for arguing that they were using fair labor, etc. Now, the problem is we cannot harm reduce in the commercial sex industry. The very nature of the industry is to create harm on both the macro level of society and the micro. On the macro is to dehumanize and debase women and children as a sex class, and on macro is to normalize, mainstream, and glorify sexual violence as a way to terrorize women. So the only way to stop the harm chain is to close down the commercial sex industry. Now, I know what I'm up against. I've been doing this for 30 odd years, so I don't think this is going to happen tomorrow. So how do we do this? We do this any way which we can. We throw as much at this industry as we can. So some government legislation, define porn as non-state torture, hold porn sites financially accountable for, define porn and also trafficking as non-state torture, hold porn sites financially accountable for the violence done to women and children in production and consumption, withdraw all credit card payments, enter corporate social responsibility, and for the porn industry, endorse age verification. And of course, what we should do is, we have the abolitionist model. What we should do is expand on the abolitionist model and include pornography as prostitution with the camera going. We at Culture Reframe do this through a public health approach. We develop programs, which I'll be happy to discuss, for parents We develop programs for professionals. We give lectures. We work on the national and international level. And where we took a public health approach, and I'll stop sharing, is that you've got to bring everybody to the table here. This is a global crisis. Pornography, trafficking, prostitution is a global crisis. Now, I am an activist as well as a professor, as well as a expert in this. And you know what? I have absolute faith because we're on the right side of history. And I believe that the more we're out there speaking about this, the more we tell people what to do. And you know what? We have had a mass dereliction of duty on the part of governments to allow this to happen. Some governments, they have to grow a backbone. And it's just going to take a few to grow a serious backbone to attack this in a way, because you shame the others into doing this. And to end, I want to say that we have no choice. Once we know what we know, we have to fight it. Otherwise, you go nuts. And you know what? One day, maybe a young person will come up to you and say, where were you when all this started? And you know what? We have two choices. You can say, sorry, didn't do anything. Or the second thing you can say is, you know what? I fought with everything I had. I fought with every ounce of my energy. And if we say that and we change the I to the we fought with every ounce of our energy, the next sentence will be, and you know what? We won. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gail. That was so informative. Wow. I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I love that I'm still learning. It's just so wonderful to hear your data on it, your research on it, and your passion to really stop this. One of the beautiful things about the U.S. Catholic Sister members is that we like to take action. So I'm really thankful that you put that in there of the things that we can do to stop this. Because when I go and speak, I hear over and over again, like, I'm just one person, what can I do? But you can do things. One of the things that I suggest to people is to take that Cosmopolitan or Vanity Fair that's very inappropriate cover and take it up to the manager and say, you need to take this from the aisle, the checkout aisle, and put it where in the magazine section, because it's inappropriate for my 9-year-old to see this every time we're going through the checkout lane, along with the candy bars. So, or turn it upside down, cover it up with black. And so I have quite a few people that have come back to me saying that they've turned them over, or they've, convinced a grocery store to put the black plastic over them. So
yeah. Oh, I rearrange grocery stores sometimes. I'm very good at that, rearranging them.
Yep. So, so if for any of our amazing attendees here, we have 66 attendees. If you want to type in the question and answer, any kind of questions that you have for Dr. Gail, I'd be happy to let her know them. One of them we have on here is sexual violence prevalent in the gay, lesbian, trans, and other types of porn, or is it something that's unique to a male-female situation?
No, it's violent. It's not as violent, I might add, right? But definitely violence, exploitation of younger boys by older men. So a lot of the themes are very similar. So yes, it's not something, but I do have to say, I mean, the violence in heterosexual porn is so off the charts. So off the chart. So when I say it's not as violent, I don't mean it's not violent.
I think that's the surprising part, is how violent it is.
That's all it is. You can't get softcore porn anymore. Parents seem key in breaking the chain. Yes, so parents are key in breaking the chain. So I would suggest you go, if somebody could drop it into the chat, culturereframe.org. So
I don't know that I can do. I could put it in the question and answer.
Yeah, put it in the question and answer.
We will send this.
I can do it.
But we will send this link. with the recording and
Oh, okay, that's great.
PowerPoint
That's
slide
great. Okay.
to every attendee. So
Are you willing to share the slides? Now, we don't share the slides, but there's a lot of talks on the Culture Reframed YouTube channel. And also, if you go into YouTube and you put in Gail Dines, there's my TEDx talk is up there, which, and also there's other talks as well.
great.
Available to show. Yes, we can. We speak to law enforcement. We work with law enforcement all the time. Can we have your contact information? I'll just put that in now.
I will make sure that I get that to everyone after when we're doing our evaluations as well. We had Dr. Mandy Sanchez at our last conference.
Yes, I know.
It was just really, pornography gets left out of this narrative of human trafficking quite often. And I was glad that you pointed that out, that abolitionists need to bring this in to really make a difference. So Kara asked, aren't boys often victims in pornography as well?
Oh, and not only that, of sexual abuse. No, that's what I was. They're victims in gay porn. Don't appear in heterosexual porn. Boys don't. That's in the gay porn. It's a different industry. But I have to tell you, when it comes to child sexual abuse images as well, boys are right up there alongside girls. And I think because I've sort of thrown so much here, I'm not going to go deeply into that because that's another talk. And boys, absolutely young boys, and it's increasing, by the way. When you speak to members like Interpol or the FBI, it's increasing.
Right. Yeah. Kara put in an excellent resource here in the question answer section of a YouTube video for Internet Safety 101 on harm of pornography. So it really is up to the parents in the schools, anywhere that kids are being able to access the internet, to make sure that those safeguards are in place.
Can I just mention, do you mind if I interrupt you and just
Go ahead.
So our free parents program is up there. Go to culturereframe.org, hit on programs, and all the resources that parents need. There's 2 programs. There's one for parents of 9 to 12. There's one for parents of 13 to 18. They've got 13 modules in them. They were written by experts in pediatrics, sexual health, adolescent development, and basically they prepare the parent to have important conversations with their kids about porn. And we even have 12 conversation scripts scripted out. Okay. And then in a few weeks, and if anyone's interested, write to info@Culture Reframed, or just go on the website and send us a message. We are actually unveiling the first ever sex education curriculum with a porn critical lens, which will be from 14 to 18-year-olds, taught by teachers or facilitators. There's no pornography in it. It's looking at porn as a form of exploitation to help build resilience and resistance in kids, and helping teachers to teach that. So our first programs were for parents and our second is for teachers.
I love that phrase, porn as a form of exploitation. I think that sums it up perfectly.
That's what it is, yes. And the curriculum makes it extremely clear. Thank you. So I share the video.
What are the challenges of prosecuting the porn industry for instances of CSAM and trafficking? That's a great question.
That's happening. That's actually happening. There's cases around now because on Pornhub, CSAM was found, and also trafficked underage trafficked girls. I think the moment the court cases are going after underage trafficked girls, which is probably the ones to win quicker. Right. And also because it's illegal anyway, trafficked or not trafficked, you can't show them. So, and it should be in the civil courts, right? It's very important that we do this in the civil courts, not the criminal, because you want to bankrupt the industry. Right, putting them in prison just means 10 others will jump up. But if you take away the profit motive, they're not interested. Porn is about money, right? It's they could be selling toothpaste for all they care. So very important to understand that the way we go after the porn industry is through money, and that's civil law, and especially in the States where the payouts are extremely high.
Yeah, I have a good friend who was an ex-porn star, and she's been trying for years to get this shut down. And her approach was very interesting. She was wanting to try to go after them through a health department avenue, where these sets and these places where they're filming the pornography are OSHA could go after them because it's
OSHA's I have to tell you, in California,
yeah.
where is OSHA?
Mm.
I mean, in what other workplace are you? Well, I'll give you an example. Whenever you go and take blood, it says if you come into contact with bodily fluids for the workers, you see signs everywhere, call 1-800-24. Could you imagine putting that sign on a porn site? You come into contact with urine, feces, blood, because the women bleed, ejaculate, you name it. Right? You have to stop shooting every second to call OSHA to come in. Now, OSHA is well aware of the issue. There are hearings. There was a few years ago, there was hearings with OSHA and the porn industry over condoms, and OSHA wouldn't even come out strongly to say you should use condoms. I mean, what other job are you treating? It would be unthinkable. So, I mean, OSHA is disgraceful, especially in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's a really interesting question that I've always had this question as well. Do you see TikTok as a doorway to porn?
Absolutely. And Mandy Sanchez has a wonderful talk on this. And by the way, TikTok is full of porn. It's not just a doorway. It's actually full of porn. Wherever kids are, the porn industry is. Right? They build algorithms. The kids don't just accidentally stumble on it. These are algorithms built by the porn industry that are then filtered into the social media like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. You have to understand that the porn industry is one of the most sophisticated industries in the world. They build levels of algorithms that are so sophisticated that it puts many other major industries to shame.
Yeah, that's and one of the things that I learned a while ago is that the American Library Association has a policy that they will not monitor people that come in to use their computers for the internet. And because of that, I think I've heard some cases of some increased pornography uses at libraries where these men are, performing self-satisfying acts on themselves right there in the library.
No, you know what? That again is another disgrace. You've got kids in a library sitting next to men who are masturbating. This has been known for a long time.
Yeah.
And to say, why is it that kids' safety is always trumped by men's desires? What a civil society says that the most important thing in our culture is the health and well-being of the next generation. That's what makes our society worth living. And what do? We throw our children under the bus all the time for reasons called freedom of speech, because some guy wants to watch porn in a library. I mean, what about a child's right and freedom to be safe? What about that?
I think that's another way people can get active and do something, is to approach the American Library Association and get that changed and demand that each library has a policy against any kind of internet or any kind of pornography looking on because I used to drop my children off at the library thinking,
of course, it was a safe space.
Right, yeah. And it's not. So yeah.
I mean, you do everything. I think you work on, if you've got children, you have to have conversations with them, and they should be age appropriate. And the conversations we've got in our programs, culturally framed, are age appropriate. You need to start scaffolding conversations about bodily parts, bodily integrity, the privacy of the body. And you need to say to a kid, very importantly, if there's anything you see on the internet anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, slam down the thing and come to me immediately. That's all you have to say. Just slam it down. That's a very powerful thing to say to a kid.
I love that.
Close it immediately and come to me.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. It gives them the power too, right?
Well,
So,
that's what we've got to do, is empower them against this
right.
incredibly predatory industry.
Right. Kara asked about the TED Talk. So I think if you just go to TED Talk, you can type in Dr. Gail Dines and that will pop up probably.
Yes, go to YouTube, put in Gail Dines TEDx.
And then
Now it's a bit dated, unfortunately. That was a few years ago, but it's still got, but there's other court talks up there that are more recent.
and Dr. Mandy Sanchez is the other person that works at Culture Reformed that
Right.
also Reframed. I always do that.
Everyone does, yeah.
That has the information, the great presentation on TikTok as well. So I think all of that information is probably right
Well,
on.
if you go onto our website, you'll see some of our presentations. Yeah.
Right. Great. Well, thank you so much, Gail.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for
So
asking me.
informative, and I'm so proud of our organization for not being afraid to have this
You
conversation.
should be. You should be.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great that you've got the guts and the courage to do this. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate your invitation to speak.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. Well, thanks everyone. We'll be getting out an evaluation and the link to this recording as well pretty soon here. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.